The Dog's Dilemma by Dragon Goddess 13. Summary. After fighting his way back through the Whale only to be ambushed by an undercover Death Eater, Sirius finds himself in a bit of a furry situation. "Come on, Hermione, lighten up," Ginny teased, dragging her friend down the street. "Ginny, I don't have time for this," Hermione replied, exacerbated. At some point, she'd stopped struggling against Ginny's grip, letting the young Quidditch star pull her through the streets of London. "Where are we even going?" "You'll see," the redhead replied, just a bit too cheerily for Hermione's taste. She sighed. "Don't worry, we're almost there," Ginny placated. True to her word, Ginny pulled around the corner, coming to a stop 3 businesses down. "An animal shelter? Why?" Hermione began, her eyes growing wide as understanding dawned on her. "Oh, no, I don't think so. Not happening." "Come on, Hermione. You said yourself Crookshanks is getting complacent in his old age. He needs a companion to keep him entertained while you're at work," Ginny pleaded. "Besides, think of how much Wilhelmina will love having a pet of her own." Hermione sighed. There was no way she could say no to her daughter, and Ginny was fully aware of that. Wilhelmina had come into Hermione's life quite unexpectedly. Her life was the same as any other Muggle's until her first bout of accidental magic had scared her overly religious parents so much that they were prepared to abandon her at a group home. Hermione had taken one look at her and decided she couldn't let that happen. She'd gone straight to the minister himself and started the adoption process that very afternoon. Being a war hero had its advantages, and before Wilhelmina had to see the inside of an orphanage, she was coming to live with Hermione. Now 6 years old, Wilhelmina was a ball of fire. Harry surprisingly had been the one to draw the young girl out of her shell. She reminded Hermione both of herself, with her studious nature, and of the twins with her mischievous streak, especially when Teddy and Victoire were together. "All right, fine, we'll look," Hermione relented, earing a grin from her companion. "Perfect, let's go." Sirius Black was angry. He'd fought his way through the foggy grey that lay beyond the veil only to tumble out at the exact moment an unspeakable he'd recognized as a Death Eater showed up to inspect the room. Sirius didn't get the chance to react as the unspeakable already had his wand out and aimed a quick spell at him. He felt his body shift the same way it did when he became an Animagi. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Black," the unspeakable said, and Sirius realized he now had to look up to the man. "But you've been gone an awfully long time, and I've grown accustomed to living as a free man in this new, mostly peaceful world. I'm almost certain I would not fare well in Azkaban, and I've too many plans." The next thing Sirius knew, he was waking up in a small metal and cinder block kennel, the barks of other dogs echoing around him. "You've got to be fucking kidding me," he thought to himself. That had been approximately 3 days previously, and the only thing Sirius had to be thankful for was the lack of Dementors in his new prison. A few people had peeked into his kennel, but his less than lackluster response to them had them turning away. And then she appeared. Sirius would recognize that shocking red hair anywhere. He never found Ginny Weasley more beautiful than he did right then. "Miney, over here," Ginny called over her shoulder. "This dog looks just like Padfoot." A moment later, another familiar face appeared. Both young women were much older than the last time he'd seen them. Ginny was taller, her once long hair cut short, shaved down on one side. She was more muscular and certainly carried herself more confidently. Hermione, on the other hand, had lost the last of her baby fat. She stood tall and proud, a young woman accustomed to a position of authority. "Wow, he really does," Hermione replied, crouching to his level. Sirius padded up to the chain-link door, sticking as much of his face that would fit into one of the gaps closest to her. She laughed, bopping him on the nose. "I think we found a winner," Ginny said, laughing as Sirius tried to squeeze more of his face through the gap. "What? No, Ginny, he's too big," Hermione protested, standing to height again. "He'll take up more space than Wilhelmina, Crookshanks, and I combined." "So are you going to let a little thing like space stop you from making your daughter the happiest girl in the world? As a marauder in training, don't you think it would delight her to have a pet that looks so much like her hero?" Hermione rolled her eyes. And I suppose my best friend is going to rat me out if I say no? It's my godmotherly duty. Hermione looked back at the dog. He had removed his snout from the chain link and was now sitting patiently, looking back and forth between them, as waiting for an answer. When he noticed her looking at him, his tongue lolled out. All right, fine, Hermione relented. You're so lucky you're cute, dog. Ginny laughed as he barked happily, jumping up and resting his paw against the kennel door. He's massive, Hermione groaned. He's so well behaved, though, Ginny commented later as they walked through the streets of London towards the Leaky Cauldron, their newest family member on a leash between them. He doesn't pull or get distracted or anything. I noticed, Hermione agreed. He's a bit older. Maybe whoever had him last trained him. Not long after, they arrived and passed through the park without stopping, heading straight for Diagon Alley. From there, they made their way down the main thoroughfare and through a back alley, coming out on an adjacent street lined with small brownstone flats. Hermione was the fourth from the end of the street, and from the moment he stepped inside, Sirius was overcome by just how Hermione-like it was. It smelled of old books and was filled with warmth and comfort, a far cry from the cold, foggy grey beyond the veil. Well, here we are, Hermione spoke, releasing Sirius from the leash. Home sweet home. They stepped into the foyer. A long hallway stretched out before them into the main flat beyond. An intricate wood staircase set to the left and a single door to the right. Sirius followed Hermione and Ginny down the hallway, which continued on the back of the house, opening up into a large sitting area to the left. To the right stood a swinging door, which he assumed led to a kitchen, and a sliding door leading to a small backyard. Hermione disappeared into the kitchen with a bag of dog food and bowls, while Ginny set up the giant dog bed and blankets in the empty corner near the sliding glass door. When Hermione returned, she was carrying a decorative basket, which she had filled with all the new toys she'd bought for him. One thing was for sure. If Sirius were a real dog, he'd be a damned lucky one. While the two witches were busy setting things up, Sirius took the opportunity to look around. The sitting room was exactly what he'd expected in Hermione's home. All for show, but not very functional. He'd bet his vault there was another sitting room in the house that the family used. Sirius backtracked to the hallway, now taking the chance to look at the framed photographs he'd noticed while walking through. He recognized immediately one of Harry, Hermione, and Ron during their first year, another of Harry and Hermione mixed in with the Weasley clan, and one of Hermione with her parents. There was another photo of a little girl he didn't recognize. She had long black hair and bright green eyes, and was smiling brightly next to Hermione. There were even a few pictures of Harry, which he took to be recent pictures. Sirius only had recognized the long-haired, bearded man in the pictures as Harry because of his mother's gorgeous green eyes. Not for the first time, Sirius found himself wondering just how long he'd been fighting his way out of the Veil. 8 years. He heard a familiar purr behind him. He turned to find Crookshanks looking down at him through the banister of the stairs. To anyone who didn't know the half-Kneasel, he appeared as he did any other day, disinterested and aloof. But Sirius knew better. Crookshanks was happy to see him, and the feeling was mutual. There you are! Hermione cut off any reply Sirius may have had as she approached. She reached down, scratching him behind the ears. I see you've already met Crookshanks. She squinted up at the cat. Now, Crooksy, come say hello to our new housemate. Hermione reached up, catching Crookshanks as he hopped off the step. She kissed him on the head and sat him down on the floor in front of Sirius. The smile on her face showed how pleased she was to see that neither of them instantly attacked the other. All right, you two, behave yourselves while I'm gone, she told them, as Ginny joined her in the hallway and the two of them disappeared upstairs. While they were gone, Sirius and Crookshanks caught up on what he had missed, the lives of the people he loved. He learned that Hermione was unmarried and her adopted daughter was called Wilhelmina, and what their future plans ought to be. All in all, Sirius had more answers than questions. Crookshanks' information was limited to the family, the people who visited Hermione's home on a regular basis, but he did promise to help Sirius get Hermione's attention to reverse the curse that the Death Eater had placed on Sirius. Before Sirius had a chance to think too much about what being a dog in Hermione's home permanently would be like, there was the sound of running feet above him, and Hermione's voice calling out, "Don't run on the stairs, Willa!" A little girl laughed in reply, and Sirius heard her feet hit the hardwood floor on the landing before they continued down the hall. He looked up from where he lay on his comfy new dog bed when he heard her gasp. "A puppy!" the young girl exclaimed. He only had a moment to recognize that she was the girl from the pictures before she was running toward him. "Merlin, help us, if he's only a puppy." He only vaguely heard Hermione's voice as he got caught up in Wilhelmina's excitement. It had been far too long since anyone was so excited to see him. "He's so cute, Mama. Look, he looks just like Padfoot," Wilhelmina continued. "Doesn't he, Mama?" "He sure does. Is that what you want to name him?" Hermione asked sweetly. "Yeah, that's perfect," the girl replied excitedly, turning to face him again. "Your name is Padfoot," she explained. "You're named after one of the best pranksters ever." Sirius barked, his tail wagging. "Damn right I am." Hermione chuckled. "All right, sweetheart. Go get cleaned up for dinner. Draco's coming over." "Okay," Wilhelmina said, hugging Sirius around the neck before turning and running back up the stairs. "Don't run on the stairs!" Hermione yelled after her, shaking her head, an amused little smile on her face. Sirius watched as she disappeared into the kitchen before running off to catch up with Wilhelmina. "Uncle Draco! Uncle Draco!" Wilhelmina turned her attention from Sirius for the first time to jump into Draco Malfoy's arms when he walked into Hermione's kitchen that evening. "Look! Mama got me a dog and I named him Padfoot. Isn't he great?" "He is great, Mina," Draco agreed, ruffling the girl's hair. "Great big," Hermione added, but she smiled when she said it, so Sirius wagged his tail at her. "We were going to eat without you." Though Hermione forbade her daughter to give Sirius scraps, he was able to sit on her chair and lick her fingers. And once when Hermione's back was turned, Draco winked at Wilhelmina and tossed a piece of cheese on the floor for Sirius. "He really does look like Padfoot," Draco said as Hermione brought out the dessert. "I love him," Wilhelmina said proudly. "I'm going to pretend he's really Padfoot. I bet Uncle Remus and Teddy will pretend with me." "Maybe he actually is Padfoot," Draco joked, stirring his pudding. If the dog sat a little straighter, no one seemed to notice. "I mean, the similarities are almost too much to be believed." Hermione laughed, though she wasn't entirely sure she found it all that funny. The truth of the matter was, her teeny-tiny crush on him years ago aside, she would have loved for it to be true. Ignoring what Sirius' return would mean for Harry or Remus, Hermione missed him too. Christmas had never felt the same since his passing, not without him belting out Christmas carols in a surprisingly operatic voice, or listening to stories about how the Marauders spent Christmas at Potter Manor. She may not have always agreed with the way Sirius behaved, but he had still been a good man, even though it would never come true. Hermione still wished Sirius could have a second chance at the life that had been stolen from him. "As wonderful as that would be, Draco, Padfoot is just a dog," Hermione told him, shaking her head sadly at Wilhelmina's hopeful face. Sensing her melancholy settling over the table, Draco steered the conversation towards work. "I want to watch the Bowie, Mama," Wilhelmina said after her bath that night. She snuggled up cozy in her pajamas on a plush sofa in the sitting room on the second floor. "Okay, sweetheart, Labyrinth it is." She took the DVD from the shelf beside the television and set it up. "Can Padfoot watch too?" Wilhelmina asked. Said dog was standing in the doorway. "Of course he can," Hermione said. "Come on, Padfoot," Wilhelmina called, and Sirius trotted across the room, hopping up onto the sofa beside her and laying his head in her lap. "All right," Hermione began. "I'm going to be working in the office with Draco. Come get me if you need anything." Wilhelmina nodded, and Hermione handed her the remote, kissing her on the forehead before leaving. "I honestly think we've exhausted all of our options with this case, Granger," Draco told her an hour later. "If it's true, then he's going to walk," she replied. "Can't we just remind the Wizengamot of the dangers of love potions? I mean, honestly, look what happened to Tom Riddle." "As true as that is, there is nothing illegal about using a love potion on someone, and without proof that he gave it to his mistress for the express purpose of convincing her to kill his wife, our hands are tied." Hermione huffed, throwing down the file she was reading and leaning back in her chair. "Hermione," Draco began, "maybe you should take a break after this case." She pierced him with an offended look that bordered on outrage, so he hurriedly continued. "It's not as if you don't deserve the break." "You think I can't handle my job?" Hermione snapped. "Only a fool would think that," he replied, looking as though he had been a fool himself to bring it up. "I just think that you work too hard. You always have. And if you're not working, you're taking care of Wilhelmina, or doing some favor for Potter and Weasley, or volunteering for some charity or cause. You should take a vacation. Take Mina to see your parents or to the shore. Just get away. Clear your mind. You have the days saved up to take a month off at a time. Hermione sighed. Maybe you're right. It would be nice to take Willa somewhere fun. Some nice memories before she's off to Hogwarts in a few years. Draco smiled, but before he could reply, a wispy white stag galloped through the window. It stopped before them, and Harry's voice sounded as it opened its mouth. Hermione, Draco, your offices have been broken into. Please come to the Ministry immediately. I've already spoken to Remus. He's agreed to watch Willy for you. Get Mina settled. I'll meet you there, Draco told Hermione as he gathered the files. Hermione wordlessly agreed. Sirius had been hoping to sneak into the library and perhaps gain Hermione and Draco's attention long enough to reignite the conversation from dinner. With Wilhelmina asleep in front of the television, Sirius slipped his head out from under her hand and sneaked down the hall, only to stop short outside the study when he noticed a white stag. It was good to hear Harry's voice again, even if the news it brought would take Hermione away. I don't want to go without Padfoot, Wilhelmina told Hermione as she watched the older woman pack her bag for her. Willa, I can't ask Remus to watch Padfoot too. That's too much. Please, Mama, was all she replied, and Sirius watched with fascination as the sure-footed by-the-book witch slowly melted under the gaze of Wilhelmina's sleeping, pleading eyes. All right, fine, but you are to give Uncle Remus no trouble. I mean it. You and Teddy stay out of trouble. Yes, Mama. Wilhelmina smiled before walking over to Sirius and putting her arms around him while she waited for Hermione to finish. I'm so sorry, Remus. She wouldn't come without him, Hermione apologized, setting Wilhelmina's overnight bag down. That's all right, Remus replied. I'm sure Teddy will get a kick out of him at breakfast. He chuckled. Hermione smiled. Hermione, have you noticed how much... Dora began. Padfoot looks like Padfoot. Yes, that's been established. Hermione finished, handing her sleeping daughter off to Remus. It's uncanny, really, Remus said. I mean, he's even got a similar scar on his heel. Sirius perked up. He'd forgotten all about that. The slightly raised patch of skin on the tip of his ear where the fur wouldn't grow back. A little nip from Moony when he was feeling particularly playful one full moon. Sirius could see the gears turning in Remus' head just a bit more and... Come on, Miney, we should get going. No telling how long we're going to be, Dora spoke up, heading to the flue. Right, Hermione replied. Thanks again, Remus. Of course. If you want to go home and sleep when you're done, I can drop everyone off at the Burrow in the morning on my way to Hogwarts. Thank you, Hermione answered gratefully as the green flames engulfed her. Remus turned from the flue, catching Sirius watching him. It's not possible, he muttered to himself before taking Wilhelmina off to bed. Bloody hell, Sirius lamented, collapsing in an exhausted heap on the floor. It seems the fates were against him. Every time it appeared that someone would finally put the pieces together, their thoughts were diverted. It was almost as if someone had hexed them. Sirius yawned and stretched. Being a dog was exhausting, especially with a mischievous 6-year-old around. He had only known Wilhelmina for one afternoon, but he'd found himself growing attached to the young girl. She was rambunctious, so outgoing, and it certainly didn't hurt that she kept talking to him like her best friend. As a young man, he'd always imagined he and his friends would all have children they would raise to carry on the marauder spirit. Because of the war, he'd been forced to let those thoughts go. But now that he had defeated the Veil and returned to a place of hope, the ideas were coming back to him. He found he was rather excited to meet little Teddy. With that in mind, Sirius slipped into a restful slumber. Teddy, don't be rude, Remus' voice drew Sirius from slumber. Where did this dog come from, Papa? That's Padfoot, he's my dog, Wilhelmina replied. She sounded so proud, and Sirius felt a little flutter in his chest. You named him after Uncle Sirius? Teddy asked, and Sirius opened his eyes to look up at the young boy. His hair was jet black, but as he turned back to Wilhelmina, it shifted to a vibrant teal color. Uh-huh. Doesn't he look like Uncle Siri? Wilhelmina asked. Teddy joined Wilhelmina at the kitchen table, where she was already eating her breakfast. Yeah, he does, he replied, shoveling pancakes into his mouth. Sirius watched amused as Remus entered the room and scowled at his son's bad table manners. All right, you two, finish up, he said and scooped food out of the pan onto the plate. I'm going to take Padfoot home, and then I'll be back to take you both to the burrow.
Oh, can't Padfoot come to Nana's with us?
Wilhelmina asked. Sirius agreed wholeheartedly. He would have been a fool not to see this for the opportunity that it was. Remus smiled, mussing his hair. Not this time, Pop. She pouted a little, which had to be one of the cutest things Sirius had ever seen. I'll be back shortly. Without prompting, Sirius followed his old friend to the flue, and within moments they were in the receiving room of Hermione's brownstone. Sirius knew this was his chance. If anyone would recognize him, Remus would. Remus looked down as he felt Padfoot paw at his leg. Moony had been screaming at him since the night before, since his dog set foot in his territory. The similarities between this dog and Sirius were bizarre, to say the least. It was almost too painful to look at him, as memories of full moons past flashed through his mind. Memories of Sirius pacing around his Padfoot, like he hadn't a care in the world, making them all laugh with his antics. Moony was convinced that this dog was Sirius Black, but Remus knew better. Sirius was gone, just like James, just like Lily, and just like Peter they'd grown up with. He was the last marauder, and while the thought saddened him, there was also hope. Hope for his son, for Harry's son, for Hermione's daughter. The next generation was here, and while it hadn't turned out as they'd imagined it would, at least their children would grow up without knowing the horrors that had altered the lives of their parents years before. "You look so much like him," Remus said, kneeling down. He scratched Sirius about the ear. "But you're not him. You can't be." He was getting choked up. What a ridiculous thing to cry over. He thought he'd already exhausted his tears for his fallen brother. "I would give almost anything for you to be him." Remus chuckled as Padfoot pressed his face into Remus' hand, and Remus ran his hand through his thick black fur, scratching behind his ears, only to hesitate over one spot in particular. A scar right on the tip of his ear. A scar in the exact same place as the scar on Sirius' ear. It wasn't similar, it was exact. But it couldn't be because Sirius was gone and Remus was alone, and this dog could not be his best friend. Could not be. "Remus!" Hermione's voice pulled him from his thoughts, and he looked up to find said woman, sleep-mussed in her pajamas, watching him from the doorway. Remus cleared his throat and stood. I'm sorry, Hermione. Did we wake you?" "No, I couldn't sleep. Too much going through my head," she explained. "I'm sure," he replied. "Dora gave me a few details before she fell asleep earlier," Hermione hummed. "How's Willa?" "She's all right. She's finishing breakfast, and I'll take her and Teddy over to Molly's." "Thank you, Remus. I really appreciate this." Remus smiled. "Of course. I've got to get going, though. Need to see them off quickly, so I'm not late for the first class of the day." She nodded her understanding and watched until he disappeared into the flue. She then turned to Sirius and yawned. "Okay, buddy, time for bed," she told him. Sirius huffed in agreement. All of this disappointment was starting to get to him. Sirius trotted along behind her into the master bedroom and waited for her to climb back into bed before jumping into the empty space beside her. She laid down and he curled up next to her, letting her lull herself to sleep by cutting her fingers through his fur. Sirius watched the young witch for some time. The last time he had seen her had been in the battle at the Department of Mysteries. She'd been unconscious, having taken a blow to the chest from Dolohov. He had been worried about her, but his first duty was to Harry, so he left her to another member of the Order and moved on. Before that had been Christmas at Grimmauld Place. Arthur was healing well from his injuries, and they were all toasting Harry for getting help to him in time. He'd found out later that night in the library, lamenting over Harry's shared connection to Voldemort. He told her that they would protect him, that Harry would be all right, but she looked skeptical. "No one who's supposed to protect him ever seems to know what's really going on," she told him. "And in the end, it's just us out there. Because despite knowing that Harry has a part in all of this, no one ever listens to him." Sirius knew she was right, but he didn't want her to worry anymore, so he promised he'd be there to listen, no matter what. It seemed to help a bit, but she still couldn't sleep, so they stayed up and talked for a while. Before that night, they'd had a grudging respect for each other. She'd saved his life, and they were both important to Harry. But that Christmas Eve spent in the library reminded Sirius of what exactly she had to face, something that Ron and Harry and even himself would never truly understand, and he realized he'd been a little too hard on her. It was hard to have fun when you always had something to prove. Hard to relax when you were afraid one mistake could send you out of the world you'd come to love and thrive in. Sirius wasn't blind. He'd seen the scar on her arm. His blood boiled with the thought of how she'd gotten it. The war was over. They had won. But what had they lost in the process? Sirius spent a month as Padfoot. He'd gotten to see Harry and little James Sirius, and if that didn't melt his heart, nothing would. Harry seemed taken aback by his appearance, but just like every time before and every time after, the idea slipped away before anyone could acknowledge it. Despite being stuck as a dog, Sirius was having a good time with Hermione and Wilhelmina. The family photo in Hermione's nightstand, Wilhelmina, Crookshanks, and Hermione, was replaced with a new one. Wilhelmina, Crookshanks, Hermione, and himself. Wilhelmina was homeschooled by several tutors, so Sirius spent most of his time with Crookshanks during the day, lounging about and trying to figure out a way to convince everyone that he was in fact serious. It wasn't all fun and games, of course. Some nights his girls had bad nightmares. When had he started considering them his girls? So he would crawl into bed with them and let them curl around him, not minding in the least when they wet his fur with their tears. He got to see Remus with his family, and what a joy it was to see his old friends so happy. And as the days rolled by, he picked up little bits here and there to fill in the gaps Crookshanks' own lack of information left. Sirius could admit it wasn't an awful life. Not having responsibilities at the moment suited him just fine, but as the days passed, Sirius found himself wishing he were human in their new family photo. Wishing that he could share a drink with Harry as he commiserated with Hermione and Ron over work. He wished he could share his best friend's joy at finally having a family of his own, or that he could enjoy being a free man again. His chance finally came, ironically enough, on Halloween. Hermione hadn't dressed him over the top for the holiday, just a little something to match Wilhelmina's own costume. They were waiting for the trick-or-treat time to start, when Harry burst through the kitchen door. Sirius had heard a few days before Halloween that they'd caught a man who broke into the prosecutor's office, but he hadn't heard much more than that, too busy trying to keep up with the children as they ran around Molly's garden. So, unbeknownst to him, the man they caught was the very same man who trapped him in his animagi form. He'd remained silent, though, the last few days, but with Harry and Ron investigating and Hermione backing them up, the evidence was mounting against him. So his only option was to play his trump card. "He claims to have information on the Veil," Harry explained, as he sat across from Remus in his office at Hogwarts. "Do you believe him?" Remus asked. "Lying means the deal he wants is invalid," Harry simply replied. "I see. And why did you come to me with this?" Remus questioned. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate Harry coming to him for counsel, but the most he could offer was what little information already existed on the Veil. Harry looked hesitant to continue. "He claims the information has to do with Sirius." Remus froze, a niggling feeling in the back of his mind that had Moony's hackles raised. "With Sirius?" Harry nodded. "I know what I want to do, and to be honest, it's the selfish thing to do." "And you're hoping I'll agree with you, relieve you of your guilt?" Harry's silence was all the answer he needed. "Be selfish, Harry. I have a feeling I know what he's going to say." Harry seemed confused by the statement, but agreed nonetheless. "Are you going over now?" Remus asked. "Yes." "Well, if you don't mind, I'm finished with classes for the day. I'd like to tag along." "Of course." Harry had trouble keeping the emotion off his face as the Death Eater before him spun his tale. "Why tell us this? If Sirius recognized you, then he knows who you are. Undoubtedly has evidence against you." Harry replied when the Death Eater was finished. He laughed. "Just because you know he's out there doesn't mean you'll ever find him. A big black dog in a city filled with dogs. Good luck." "The fate seems to be working against you." The man looked confused. "None of us could quite believe why Hermione's new dog looked so much like Padfoot. We all chalked it up to coincidence," Harry explained. "Thanks to you," Remus continued, "we can now prove it's not." Harry practically leapt from the flue, just barely waiting to make sure Remus made it through before he was out the door of the receiving room. He could hear laughter and voices downstairs.
"No running down the stairs,"
Wilhelmina's voice called out, followed by Hermione's ringing laughter.
"Hi, Uncle Harry."
Wilhelmina greeted him as he burst through the kitchen door. "Harry, what's wrong?" Hermione asked. Hermione and Wilhelmina were sitting at the kitchen table making Halloween decorations out of construction paper. Sirius sat in a third chair, watching, a headband with foam bats on springs on his head. Maybe it was all the tension, or maybe it was just the absurdity of the situation, but Harry broke down, laughing to the point of doubling over. He was vaguely aware of Remus entering behind him. "What is the matter with him?" Hermione asked Remus. "It's a bit of a long story," Remus replied, as he tried not to laugh as he noticed Sirius as well. "Well," he continued, turning to Sirius, "I think your little vacation is over, Sirius." At the sound of his name, Sirius hopped off the chair, bounding over to Remus. "What are you talking about, Remus?" Hermione asked, as Wilhelmina exclaimed.
"Is it really Uncle Siri?"
Sirius barked. Remus knelt down, scratching Sirius behind the ears. "I think I know what spell the Death Eater used to trap you like this." Sirius stamped his paws impatiently. "Harry, what is he talking about?" Hermione questioned, growing frustrated. "The spy among the Unspeakables claims that he came across Sirius while doing his rounds in the Department of Mysteries. Sirius recognized him as a Death Eater from the First War, so to keep his cover, he forced him into his animagus form and sealed him in."
"Is it really Uncle Siri?"
Wilhelmina repeated, even more excited than before. Harry smiled down at her. When Wilhelmina had come into their lives, she was the complete opposite of the little girl she was now. She was fully aware of what she had lost when her parents turned on her, of what it meant that she no longer lived with them, and Remus had mentioned how much her story resembled Sirius. So Harry had taken it up on himself to tell her about his beloved godfather and his exploit with the Marauders. She'd soon come to idolize Sirius, realizing that it wasn't just her, that bad things happened to lots of people, and the trick was to find happiness even in the darkest of places by making a family of your own. She'd found a new family, one that loved her for who she was, just like Sirius had all those years ago. "We're about to find out for sure," Harry told her. Remus stood then, drawing his wand. "All right, Sirius, now hold still," he instructed before waving his wand in a slow, deliberate pattern. Nothing appeared to have happened, but Remus didn't look upset, so they assumed it had worked. "Try changing back." Soon enough, a man stood in the place of the dog.
"Wicked!"
Wilhelmina exclaimed.
"I want to be an animagus."
"Not until you're older," they all answered simultaneously. It wasn't until after he'd greeted Harry and Remus that he turned to Wilhelmina, crouching down to her level. "Now," he began, "you need to finish your decorations, little one. We have a trick-or-treating to get to." Wilhelmina's face lit up.
"Really?"
Sirius nodded, scooping her up and standing to height again. Wilhelmina laughed, hugging him around the neck. Hermione smiled as she watched them. "It's good to have you back, Sirius," she told him. "It's good to be back, kitten." The end. Thank you for listening to today's day of the Spooktober Podfic Fest. Stay tuned for more spooky content.